When next year's census comes around and you're asked for your ethnicity, what box do you check? Are you ethnically Canadian, as 15% of the population reported in 2021? Are you a hyphenated Canadian, or are you something else? What even is a Canadian, and is the Canadian identity the same as the Canadian ethnicity? Many would argue that just because someone feels Canadian or is even a citizen of Canada, that doesn't mean that they're obviously an ethnic Canadian. Others, like Justin Trudeau, think that when it comes to Canadian identity, there simply just isn't one. But then there are others who urge us to look at Canadian identity and Canadian ethnicity as synonymous. After all, what is a country if the people in that country aren't a cohesive unit around a shared national identity? My next guest makes this exact case in a recently published essay with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute titled, "Yes, Canadians Have Their Own Distinct National Identity." Joining me now to talk about Canadian ethnicity and Canadian identity is journalist, commentator, and policy analyst Geoff Russ. Mr. Russ, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Harrison. Appreciate it.
So our former Prime Minister told the New York Times in 2015, Justin Trudeau, that in Canada there is, quote, no core identity. Now you and I and pretty much the rest of the country know that that's not true, but to start us off, can you just define for us what that Canadian identity is?
I think Canadian identity broadly means you are part of the English-speaking world, the Anglo world, if you want to put it that way. You are shaped by the geography of the northern half of this continent where Canada lies, and the histories of the people who are here. That may sound overly technical, but that is more or less how identity is formed. It is formed by place, people, and time. And I think it's important not to lose sight of that, of the fact that Canada is part of the English-speaking world. It's a world that was mostly united and up until about 60 years ago. And consequently, we shouldn't get too distracted by abstract ideas of Canadian identity. It simply is what it is. And we should be more than satisfied with that. We don't need a grand mythos like the United States, like a great magisterial Republican ideology. We don't need to have a great French Republican ideology. It just simply is what it is.
In your article, you write, quote, ethnicity should not be confused with race or blood. Instead, it should be recognized as a synonym for identity. And there is no question that Canadians possess their own. Now, I like the sentiment, but a textbook reading of the definitions show that they aren't exactly synonymous. And another issue we have is that there really isn't a common and agreed upon definition of Canadian ethnicity. Now, rather than asking you to define it, I want to ask you, as a policy position, should Canada work towards some commonly culturally accepted definition of the Canadian ethnicity?
I mean, you can call it ethnicity, you can call it identity, but I think Canadianness would be the best word for it. Work towards a shared Canadianness.
Right. Because, you know, the census question, which is sort of the where the article came about, the census question is interesting because obviously the objective of the census is to get as clear of a demographic snapshot of the country as you possibly can. And since we don't really have a common or clear definition of Canadian ethnicity, should we do away with the Canadian ethnicity option in the ethnicity question altogether if we don't really know what that means?
No, I don't think we should take it away at all. Because, like, take for me, for example, my on the one half, my dad's ancestors are Haida. They've been here, well, for quite a few millennia now, and the other half is Scottish, British. But I can't think of another frame of reference for how I would define my identity, ethnicity, other than Canadian. It's like the McDonald quote: "All my remembrances and hopes are Canadian. All my cultural vantage points are Canadian." And I think if we get too bogged down in trying to identify culture, I think an English person would still be stumped if you ask them define Canadian ethnicity or English ethnicity or identity for me. be very much shaped by their regionalisms, where they came from. So I think we shouldn't get too bogged down in trying to define or how should I describe this? An all-encompassing Canadianness. I think we need to have something that we just recognize as Canadian and not get too textbook about it. I think there's that great quote that says, "I don't know if I can define civilization, but I think I know it when I see it." I think Canadians can sometimes be difficult to define, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah, that's actually a good way to put it, actually. I hadn't thought about it that way. You know, we've had official multiculturalism in Canada for close to 50 years now. In your opinion, has the policy of official multiculturalism been a success?
It's such a strange question, and that's not me impugning you. I'm simply saying successful, as in we have many people from all parts of the world, and we haven't killed each other. Sure, successful, I suppose, but I don't think it's made us unique in any way, shape, or form. I don't think it's made us more unified in any way, shape, or form. You look at a country like Australia or modern Britain, the UK, or the or the modern United States. They're all lowercase multicultural societies, but I don't see much more unity there. I think we're being torn apart by the same globalized conflicts. We have the same questions over, colonial heritage, colonialism, systemic racism, and all that, brouhaha. So I don't think it's made Canada more special or unique in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I don't think it's really done anything.
Right. It seems to me, and I still haven't been able to wrap my head around it, but Canada, when it was founded, was a multicultural country. It was built on the cultures of British and French culture, a combination of that with some indigenous culture as well, more slowly. But it was multicultural before Canada became the official multicultural country that we are today. And it seems to me that really the only objective behind official multiculturalism is to diminish the roles of the British and French culture and kind of dilute that Canadian identity. Do you agree with that?
To a degree, I think it's just multiculturalism for the sake of multiculturalism. It just assumes that the more multicultural we are, the better we are. And I personally would say I'm born and raised in a very multicultural neighborhood of Vancouver, lower M multicultural. I don't particularly, or I should say, I've never minded living around people who are different than me in terms of ancestry or heritage. But the idea that we shouldn't be trying to become closer in this day and age to me is strange, and it's very unique to Western countries. And as we've clearly demonstrated, they're not stronger for it in any way. Because people come to Canada wanting to be Canadian, but we haven't presented them, or at least the government doesn't present them with much to assimilate into, or integrate, perhaps is the better word. Because bear in mind, I don't want to wipe out somebody's ancestral religion or culture, but I do want them to be Canadian. And like I said, I know Canadian when I see it. And as I said before, it's not really dependent on blood. And we can get to that later, of course.
Right. And I mean, I think when most people are presented with the ethnicity question in the census, they likely probably think the same way I do, which is an ethnic Canadian is someone who has been here for many generations, whose ancestry is British, French, or indigenous in some way. That already is sort of a multiracial ethnic description. But do you think that when Canadians are presented with that ethnicity question in the census, that's kind of where their head goes? If we were to put some label on it?
Mistakenly, perhaps, but I think the best analogy is the English. At what point did the Huguenots become English, even though they are French Protestants? They're not Norman. They're not part of that, William the Conqueror stock. They are much more closer to our time in their immigration. So I think when it comes to Canadian ethnicity, if you have nothing else to point to but Canada, well, then I guess you can only be purely Canadian. Like I consider myself to be perhaps British by distant ancestry, but ethnically Canadian. I think many people in this country have other things to point to. They have other passports. They have another place they can claim as a homeland. But for some people, you simply just don't have that. Maybe that's a luxury to have a second passport. I don't have it. There's nowhere else I can go in this world. There's nowhere else I can identify with.
I want to kind of go back to the official multiculturalism topic because obviously the topic, or one of the things that we were all taught in schools quite heavily is the concept of the cultural mosaic, where, when you come to Canada, you bring your culture with you, and it all becomes part of this one large national experience, this one large Canadian experience. But to me, that idea, the cultural mosaic, kind of works against the very idea of a unifying Canadian identity. What do you think about that?
I think in the context of modern technology, that's absolutely correct. I think it's very difficult for, how do I describe, what's the best way to put this? For the mother country to become a foreign country, and you do want your Canadians to identify with Canada. And I think with the growth, I think Marshall McLuhan wrote about this, George Grant wrote about this, but just the spread of digital technology after the Second World War did create something of a uh, what's the word I'm looking for here? Anyways, if you came over, say, from France 10 years ago, it's very easy to culturally just be as French as you want. You have to speak English on the day to day if you live outside of Quebec, but probably everything you watch or read might still be in metropolitan French. And so that's not going a long way to making that person more than a Canadian than someone with a Canadian passport, and that should not be the goal. I mean, that's more of a corporate membership. That's like a Costco membership. That's not being part of a nation.
Right. What do you think needs to be done to actually, I would say, properly assimilate a massive wave of newcomers, which we have experienced in this country? I think many Canadians not only feel like the numbers are too high, but that there isn't really any genuine effort to assimilate this new population into the broader Canadian society. What do you think needs to be done or can be done to improve that?
Time. You need time to bring people into an identity, and we do need to cut the numbers. That's not just a cultural necessity, that is also a economic necessity, given the lack of affordability, the shortening of the availability of services. So time, smaller numbers for sure, breaking out this low growth, mass immigration, real estate speculation economy, it cannot happen soon enough. But on the identity front, give it time. I always go back to the example of John Diefenbaker. By his time, he was a German by ancestry, or his ancestors were German. But, this was a champion of the Red Ensign. This was a champion of the Queen, the things people took to be Anglo-Canadian at the time. So it very much is possible to not be of British or French stock and become a full-throated, unhyphenated Canadian. I'm not sure Diefenbaker, in fact, he specifically said unhyphenated Canadian. Now, but that still meant something to Diefenbaker. That didn't mean anything. Being Canadian meant something particular. Did not mean the whole world can be Canadian. It means no, I'm Canadian is something distinct in the world.
It seems also that so many of our national institutions, beyond the government, are encouraging people to hold on to their ties from their old country, from their mother country, and preserve their culture, along with that cultural mosaic point. But as you write in the article, at a certain point, quote, in a family's history, the old country becomes a foreign country. And I think I like that because I think a lot of Canadians can relate to that. Almost all Canadians can relate to that to some extent. Um, do you feel like there is this sort of institutional and media push for us to embrace our hyphenated Canadian status and really rally around the flag of multiculturalism and not the national flag?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's this strange tendency to think that that's what makes Canada distinct. No, it doesn't make Canada distinct at all. I mean, ironically, people always bring it up to say in reference to the United States, where they say, "Oh, we're the multicultural mosaic that makes us not American." Well, that whole ideology was inspired by was basically the Democratic Party of the 1960s. So that is an American ideology, and I'm not an America hater whatsoever. But to take a great society ideology from 1964, bring it to 2025, and say this is Canada, I think is seriously outdated. And then you think about all the geopolitical tensions too, and the cultural tensions around the world, the importation of conflict. You're not gonna burn the religious building of someone you consider to be your brethren. And I think a lot of Canadians don't see each other as brethren in this day and age. And I think that is a huge problem. I mean, growing up, I had friends whose parents were from Jamaica, Hong Kong, Poland. Everyone felt Canadian. And this was in the early 2000s. This is in the multicultural era. But there was a lot more official sense on the part of, say, public teacher unions and government that the existence of Canada was a good thing, which I don't think is the case anymore. They see it as this, dreadful colonial imposition upon the continent. When they say so-called Canada or these lands we now call Canada, there's this delegitimization that discourages a unified national identity, which to me is just toxic and ridiculous. I'm not sure the people implementing it are malicious, but I think they're rather silly. I'd just like to clarify, the people who come up with the ideas, are they malicious? Very likely. Are the people who implement them? No, they're just silly bureaucrats. I just wanted to make
Yeah.
that distinction.
But I think to that point, there is something that a young person in school internalizes whenever they hear that, right? That leaves a longer impact in them, where they start to think that this country is worthless. It's not worth celebrating. It would be worth their time to go and, embrace their ancestry rather than embrace the country that they're from, perhaps their parents and even grandparents are from. They want to go back and embrace their ancestry because Canada is something we should be ashamed of. Do you think, as a policy position, one of the best ways that we can preserve and cultivate a shared national unity is to just end this war on our history, stop this game we're playing, and to actually go back to promoting ourselves and feeling proud about the amazing things our country has done in the past?
Absolutely. That needs to be part of new language going forward. And the other language going forward is simply to shift institutional and official language to talking about a singular positive Canadianness. And I think people become too prescriptive when it comes to policies. Policy is complex, boring, and wonky. But if you get people simply talking like Canada is one unified, distinct place, well, that would go a very long way. And I've said that verbatim on other podcasts before. And the other thing too is, stop trying to fiddle with Canadianness. Stop trying to add certain things. We have the foundations of a great national culture. Let it stand. Let what we have stand, and let everything gradually seep into it. It will happen.
Right. Well, that's a perfect place for us to end the conversation. Geoff, where can Canadians who are watching this find you and read your work?
You can find all my stuff at Geoff Russ 3 on X. I'm also I write mainly for the National Post, MacDonald Laurier, occasionally for Modern Age and American Publication, and others here and there. But Geoff Russ 3 is the main repository where I list it all.
And a link to the essay we discussed will be in the description of this video. Thank you all for watching. If you liked this conversation, you want to hear more conversations about Canadian identity, let me know by liking this video, subscribing to my channel, and sharing this video with your networks. Thank you all for watching.